My entire life felt like a flimsy fantasy at the conclusion of the night, which had begun like a well-executed dream. The occasion was the Carmichael Estates yearly gala, which was so ostentatious that even the champagne appeared to make fun of you. For weeks, Lauren had been gushing over it. "For my career, it's a great opportunity," she had said, her voice full of excitement. There was always something grandiose about Lauren. Like a skilled storyteller, she infused her charm into every exchange, demonstrating her ability to command a room. This evening was no different. She was dressed in a crimson gown that appeared to have been poured over her. But it was more than just the clothing. It was the way she acted, as though I were her stage and the world was her audience. The silent man with her handbag in the wings was me. The evening flew by in a flurry of glittering lights and meaningless small talk. Playing the ideal hostess, Lauren was in her groove, but something wasn't quite right. It was subtle, a flash here, a slip up there. At certain jokes, her laughter lasted a bit too long. She seemed to avoid looking at me, and when she believed no one was watching, a brief expression crossed her face. I dismissed it and poured another glass of wine in an attempt to have fun. After all, she had been under a lot of stress lately, and I couldn't really point to anything specific. Then Lauren vanished in the middle of the night. At first, I didn't give it much thought, but when 20 minutes stretched into an hour, I began to wonder if she was dealing with some last-minute issue. I called her straight to voicemail and texted her without getting a response. It was then that I saw him. People automatically smiled back at him. He was tall, sharp, and had a charming jaw. He was a sponsor of the event. Earlier, I had seen Lauren conversing with him. He was now sneaking into a side passageway, moving purposefully, as if he didn't want to be noticed. I followed him. The party's hum subsided to a faint buzz as the hallway led to a more sedate area of the estate. I hesitated, my instinct telling me to go back, but curiosity, or perhaps something more profound, drew me forward. A slightly ajar door at the end of the hall let in the muted sound of their conversation. The tone had an intimate quality that made my skin prickle, even if I couldn't make out the words. I moved in closer. Then I heard my heart thumping like a drum. It wasn't speech, not even dialogue. Her voice burst into breathy, low groans. A horrible weight sank into my stomach as my chest clenched. I kept my hand on the doorknob. I wanted to interrupt and demand answers, but my legs felt like stone, immobile regardless of what was going on beyond that door. The silence was broken as my phone buzzed in my pocket. Reflexively, I pulled it out. "Hey, how are you?" Lauren asked, her tone light and informal. "You are aware of my love for you?" My ears were still ringing from what I had just heard, but for a second, I thought I had dreamt everything because of how steady and unaffected her tone was. I took a deep breath. "Where are you?" I controlled my trembling voice. "Just finishing up with a customer." The lie came out of her mouth so naturally that it sounded almost practiced. "I'll see you shortly." "All right. Have fun at the celebration." She ended the call. I stared at the screen before I could reply, my head racing, my hands shaking. I couldn't determine whether I was more afraid that she was lying to me or that she didn't even seem to care if I believed her. For the first time in our years together, I felt as though I was looking at a complete stranger. I didn't return to the main gathering. Rather, I stood motionless. The phone was still clenched in my grasp in that dark hallway. Her words were still ringing in my mind. "You are aware of my love for you." How could she sound so serene, so unconcerned? The door at the end of the corridor creaked shut while I was standing a few steps away from what felt like betrayal. I pushed against the wall out of reflex. 2 sets of footsteps came next. She had won. I could hear the sound of those heels anywhere. The other was purposefully heavier. Lauren and he were there as I glanced around the corner. They failed to see me, absorbed in their conversation, or rather, the absence of it. His hand brushed her lower back as they made their way back towards the crowd, but no words were exchanged, just a lingering look. She didn't recoil. She didn't back off. I wanted to confront her in front of everyone, but I refrained for some reason. Fear wasn't the reason. Something darker, something colder. Before I felt the sting of it, I needed to know how far this had gone and how deeply the knife had been buried. For the next hour, I was a shadow that moved through the dazzling crowd, constantly keeping her in sight. There were brief, nearly imperceptible moments when she would peek over her shoulder, her eyes not looking for me. She moved as if nothing had happened, laughing too loudly at jokes and captivating the visitors by acting like the ideal host. For him, an auction served as the focal point of the gale. Lauren, ever the evening's reward, was announced by the showrunner on stage. The warmth and passion in her voice filled the room as she spoke. The audience loved her. From the rear of the room, I observed her while mentally reliving the noises I had heard in the corridor. I felt a hand on my shoulder at that moment. When I looked around, I saw a woman in her mid-30s with bright red hair and an inquisitive expression. "My name is Stephanie," she said in a low voice. "Although we haven't met in person, I've heard good things about you." "Yes," I said stiffly. "Lauren's husband." A faint smile flickered over her lips, yet something was strange. She lowered her voice a little as she leaned in. "You're a man of patience. What is the intended meaning of that?" I asked with a knot in my stomach. She paused and looked around to make sure no one was watching. "I've witnessed her behavior with him. Carefully, you deserve to know my heart," she said. A hard thud against my ribs. "Bryce, who are you referring to?" she added, gesturing to the tall man who had vanished into the corridor with Lauren earlier. She and he had been friends for several months. She drifted off, leaving the unspoken words hanging between us, but I didn't want to say anything. My throat was dry. "You're telling me this, but why?" I asked. Stephanie remarked, "I've been where you are, and no one told me until it was too late," and her face softened. I couldn't answer. Before I could ask another question, my mind was a flurry of rage, incredulity, and a terrible sense of clarity. When the applause broke out, I turned to see Lauren leaving the stage. She was shining and enjoying the attention, and although I detested the fact that I still wanted to believe in her, the seed had already been sown. Bryce's hand on Lauren's back, the sounds coming from the hallway, and Stephanie's words, all of it indicated the same terrible reality. Lauren's smile was as bright as ever as she walked towards me. "You're there," she murmured, putting her arm around mine as if nothing had happened. "You haven't said much tonight. Are you all right?" She looked into my eyes, but not worriedly. She seemed to be trying to find out if I had worked it out. I made an effort to grin. "Yes, I did lie, merely taking pleasure in the celebration." She smiled. "Excellent. Let's socialize." I looked over my shoulder as she escorted me back into the crowd. Bryce's countenance was unreadable as he watched us. I realized then that this was not the end of it. It was a quiet ride home, but not a pleasant one. Every sound, including the hum of the automobile engine and the sporadic ping of her phone, felt like thunderclaps because of the oppressive quiet. With her face lit up by the screen's illumination, Lauren was going through her texts. I maintained my grip on the road, the steering so tight that it hurt my knuckles. "You didn't say anything tonight." When she eventually spoke, it was while she was busy watching me shine, and her voice broke the tension like a dull knife. I gave a bland response. As though that were a praise, she gave a small laugh. "The night was enjoyable. I believe we got it perfect." The word hung like fog in the air. Us. Lauren leaned over to give me a cheek kiss as we pulled into the driveway, and then got out of the vehicle. "I'm heading to the shower," she said, casually vanishing into the home. I remained in the car and allowed the evening's burden to overwhelm me. Bryce's hand on her back, Stephanie's remarks, the sounds behind that door muffled. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't help but notice the picture it painted. A few minutes later I entered. Except for the faint sound of running water upstairs, the home was silent. My intention was to go to bed, but instead I walked into the kitchen. I stood looking at the darkening window while neatly pouring a drink of whiskey. I saw my image flashing back at me. I was thinking when I heard a faint buzzing noise. Her phone was on the counter where she had left it, a message flashing on the screen. I was aware I shouldn't gaze. To avoid becoming that guy, I told myself to go, but curiosity or desperation won. Preview. Go through Bryce. "You're great. I'm eager for the next time." As I unlocked her phone, my hand shook. I was aware of the passcode. Our anniversary was that day. The messages, ironically, were in plain sight, a breadcrumb trail that led directly to the truth. "Tonight was ideal, Bryce. I kept thinking about you the entire time, Lauren. You're addictive, Bryce. When will we be able to slip out again? My chest felt hollow and icy, as if ice had been implanted in place of my ribs. I kept scrolling. Every word made my heart sink. This was more than a little flirtation. It was meticulous, well-planned, and calculated. One of the pictures showed her wearing the same red dress from a perspective that made my stomach turn. Another was of him without a shirt. His sneer taunted me. The sound of water upstairs no longer startled me, even through the screen. As if touching fire, I put the phone back where I found it and locked it. My hands were scorched. Lauren arrived downstairs a minute later, a towel wrapped over her hair. The steam made her face sparkle. "What have you been up to?" Her tone was light, almost playful, as she asked. I gazed at her, the messages repeating in my head. The way she and Bryce had laughed earlier in the evening caught my attention. She didn't know that I knew. I was unable to sleep. I said, "I just needed a drink," in a surprisingly composed tone. Leaning against the counter, she approached. I could only make out the image of her lips against his skin as her towel slipped just enough to reveal the delicate curve of her collarbone. "You're behaving strangely," she said, cocking her head and grinning teasingly. I was constantly disarmed by her. "Is everything all right?" I wanted to face her. I wanted to throw the phone in her face and demand answers. But instead, I took a sip of my drink and shrugged. "I'm all right." She narrowed her eyes, examining me. Then, as if concluding I wasn't worth the effort, she kissed my cheek again. "Don't stay up too late." I watched her walk away up the steps and out of sight. My jaw stiffened as I replayed her words in my thoughts. "You're great. I'm eager for the next time." I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending. The next morning, Lauren was all smiles, humming to herself as she sipped her coffee at the kitchen island. She looked so natural, like the woman I'd fallen in love with. But now I knew otherwise. Every smile, every touch, every word, it all felt polluted. I couldn't look at her without hearing Bryce's name, without seeing the messages etched into my brain. "This afternoon, I have an appointment with a new client," she said, swirling her spoon in her coffee. "Great chance. Most likely, I'll be at home. Late. It was a slap of a word. I struggled to maintain a neutral expression. "What is the name of the client?" Startled by the inquiry, she looked up at me. "Well, she stammered. I spoke again in a steady tone. "With whom are you meeting?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, this is merely an initial meeting. They would be unknown to you." I looked at her for a while, examining her closely. She was also good. Excellent. I could have believed her if I hadn't seen the texts. "It sounds significant," I said, sipping my coffee. "Yes, it is." Her voice was bright as she answered. "Here, we're creating something amazing. Eric, we're there." When she went for her appointment, it was that nonchalant, harsh word once more. I wasted no time at all. I knew I would lose my nerve if I didn't take action right away. My friend Jake, whom I trusted to keep his mouth quiet, answered the phone. The second ring caught his attention. "What's up, Eric?" he inquired. "Please do me a favor." My voice was tight as I spoke. Jake was quiet for a moment. Next, aside, "This sounds like a serious situation." "Yes, it is. Could you bring your car and meet me in an hour? I'll tell you everything." We were parked 2 blocks from a downtown cafe an hour later. As I looked around the sidewalk, Jake was driving. Both Lauren's and Bryce's cars were already there. "Your wife is being spied on by us," Jake questioned in a tone that was a mixture of incredulity and worry. "I must be told the truth," I said, grasping the dashboard's edge. Jake sighed once more without arguing. When I was like this, he knew better than to push me. Lauren and Bryce came out of the cafe, giggling a few minutes later. My stomach churned as they made their way to his automobile. They didn't appear to be colleagues talking logistics. They had a different appearance. "Adhere to them." My voice was quiet as I spoke. Jake paused. The automobile was then started. "Are you certain about this, man?" "Never have I been more certain," I answered. As they entered Bryce's beautiful black vehicle, my gaze fixed on their figures. We kept a safe distance and followed them across town. They made a halt at a boutique hotel, a little unobtrusive location off the main thoroughfares. Lauren was the first to leave, looking around like a nighttime burglar. Then, With his palm brushing the small of her back, Bryce joined her. My chest constricted as they vanished inside, a mixture of sadness and rage rising to the surface. Jake gave me a quick look and tightened his jaw. "Stay here, Eric," he said as I opened the door. "How are you going to proceed?" Jake questioned in a worried tone. "I'm not sure. I can't just sit here," I said. I didn't wait for his answer. As I made my way toward the motel, my legs felt heavy. Every stride I took made my heart race. I had no strategy, just the intense urge to face her, to rip the lies from her, and to demand the truth. The air had a subtle lavender scent and was cool. As I marched past the counter in the direction of the lifts, the receptionist hardly gave me a glance. I was unsure of the room they were in, but I had a feeling I would soon learn. The gravity of the situation struck me as I stood in the lift. This was it, the point at which there is no way back. Everything would alter, no matter what happened next. With a gentle chime, the doors opened, and I emerged into the corridor. Even though my hands were shaking, I made myself go ahead. Every step felt heavier than the one before. Her shoes, our house, his hotel, and her red heels were kicked off carelessly outside a door. For a time, I just stared at those shoes. The sounds from the party, the texts, and the laughs all flew through my head. In a horrible maelstrom, everything collided. I lifted my hand and knocked a few seconds after taking a deep breath. My heart thumped so loudly that it overpowered everything else as my knocks seemed to last forever. The faint murmurs of distant voices and the hum of the corridor lights were all I could hear. I was a little afraid they wouldn't respond to that. Perhaps I had frightened them into silence. Then the door opened. Bryce's smug face froze as he stood there with his shirt unbuttoned and his hair tousled, as if he had just stepped out of a shower. We merely stared at one another when he briefly caught sight of me. "Am I able to assist you?" His eyes showed his uneasiness, but his voice was firm. I didn't respond. I looked into the room, past him. I noticed her at that point. Lauren. She was standing near the bed, her hair moist from the shower, and she was dressed in one of those fluffy white hotel robes. "Eric," she said in a startled tone. She widened her eyes, but not out of guilt. "No." She seemed annoyed at me, as if I had just interrupted something slightly bothersome. I tightened my hands at my sides. "A client meeting looks like this," I remarked. In an attempt to keep me from seeing her, Bryce moved nearer and cleared his throat. "This isn't what it looks like, man." "Oh, don't hurt me." I raised my voice and snapped. "The texts are visible to me. I've heard the justifications. I am fully aware of what this is." At last, Lauren got up, tightened the robe around her waist, and walked to the door. "Eric, relax," she said in a condescending tone. "You're creating a commotion. A scene. I'm the one creating a scene while you and he are in a hotel room." I said again, trembling with anger. As though I were a toddler having a fit, she groaned and rubbed her temples. "This is not the place for this topic, and I'm not sure why you're here." "Really? Lauren, where's the proper location?" I insisted. "To have you lie to me face to face in comfort at home?" With his hands raised like a peacekeeper, Bryce stepped in once more. "Let's just talk about this, dude. Quit talking." I pointed a finger at him and growled. "You are not allowed to speak with me." All Lauren did was roll her eyes. The last straw caused my pent-up rage to blow up. "For what duration has this been occurring?" "What?" My voice reverberated down the corridor as I yelled. "For what length of time have you been skulking behind my back?" She didn't respond. Instead, she folded her arms and gazed at me with the same cold contempt that had been eroding her personality for months. "Don't be too loud, Eric," she hissed. I shot back, "No." My voice is no longer lowered. I'm done acting like nothing is wrong. Lauren's lips quirked into what looked like a smile, but it wasn't kind or contrite. "While you're off playing house with this guy." It was a jest. "You're quite dramatic," she spoke, her tone brimming with disdain. "I didn't want to tell you because of this. You are incapable of managing situations like an adult." Her remarks were like a blow to my head. "Are you serious now? You're holding me responsible." She gave a shrug, silently cueing me with a quick glance at Bryce. "Take a look at yourself." "You're coming in like a jealous madman," she replied. I let out a sour laugh rather than attempting to have a sensible discourse. "Lauren, you're cheating on me." What is meant to be rational about this? The weight of my remarks hung over the room for a while, as the three of us stood there in uncomfortable stillness. Bryce shifted uneasily, obviously wishing he was somewhere else. However, Lauren appeared disinterested, as if she was only waiting for me to go so they could resume their activities. I cherished you. I tried to keep my voice together, but it cracked as I spoke. I had faith in you. Her face remained stern. It hardened, if anything. Perhaps that is the issue. You put too much trust in me, she replied icily. You didn't even bother to notice when I began to pull away. The utter lack of regret in her tone was perhaps more hurtful than the fact that her comments were a dagger to the heart. She didn't apologize. She was indifferent. I backed off a little unsteadily, my mind racing. You are amazing, I whispered, more to myself than to Lauren. As if the whole experience had worn her out, she said, just go home, Eric. We'll discuss this later when you're more composed. I gazed at her, looking for signs of the woman I assumed I was married to. She wasn't there. She was a stranger, this Lauren, the one standing in a hotel room with another man, harsh and unrepentant. He should be worth it, I hope, I said at last, my voice sounding hollow. I left the door open behind me and turned to go without waiting for a response. I don't recall taking the car home. My mind was somewhere else, trapped in that hotel room, replaying every word, every sneer, every cutting glance Lauren gave me. My fists grabbed the driving wheel as if it were the only thing keeping me connected to reality. Her lack of interest was more than just painful. The way she stood there and pretended that I was the issue and that I was being unreasonable for confronting her during her treachery infuriated me. How could I have missed her side for so long? I sat there looking at our house's darkened windows as soon as I turned into the driveway. Our home, which we had built together over the years and filled with memories, now felt like the set of a play that had been written about me without my knowledge. At last, I dragged myself into the house from the automobile. It was very quiet inside. To let her experience even a small portion of the mayhem she had let loose inside of me. I wanted to shout and smash something. Instead, the questions began to flood in as I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. Was she simply that skilled at disguising it? Or had I been blind? Had I been so absorbed in my own routine that I hadn't seen her drifting away? With every minute that went by, the weight of the night pressed more against my chest, making the hours drag by. Perhaps I should call someone like Jake, but what would I say? Hey dude, my wife has been having affairs with a man named Bryce, it turns out. Do you want to get a beer? Finally, as daylight peeked through the curtains, I was exhausted. Haunted by visions of Lauren and Bryce, I fell into a restless slumber on the couch. I can still hear their laughter in my dreams. Lauren's car was back in the driveway, and the sun had already risen when I woke up. As I got up and wiped the sleep from my eyes, my gut constricted. She was at home, standing at the counter wearing jeans and a loose jumper, one of her casual outfits, and the fragrance of coffee filled the kitchen. She had such a typical, homely appearance. My skin crawled. I looked at her in disbelief and sadness as she poured herself a cup without even looking at me. All you have to say is that? She let out a sigh, at last looking at me. I don't want to do this now, Eric. Unfortunately, we're doing this, I snapped while standing up. You cannot enter here and pretend that nothing occurred. Lauren took a sip of her coffee and rolled her eyes. Again, you're being theatrical. You stated that last night when I caught you and Bryce in a hotel room. I shot back, my voice rising. She didn't deny it, but her face stiffened. All right, she replied coolly, putting down her mug. Do you wish to speak? Let's have a conversation. Fantastic. First, let's talk about why, I said, clenching my fists at my sides. Why all of this? I was bored, she answered, leaning against the counter with her arms folded. Do you want to hear that, Eric? The remark was like a kick to the stomach. Bored? I shook my head. Indeed. Bored, she said sharply. You gave up trying. You settled in. You ceased to be fascinating. But Bryce's arrival gave me a new lease on life. My jaw tensed as I tried to maintain my cool. And you might have told me that. You chose to discard everything for him, even though we could have worked on it. For a brief period, Lauren's face softened, but not out of regret. Eric, it was sympathy. I didn't discard everything. I still love you, but it's not enough, she added. Those 4 words cut like a knife through me. Insufficient. I broke down, unable to control my emotions. As if that made it better, she continued. I stepped back and ran my hand through my hair. Are you even able to hear yourself? I said with a sour laugh. It's not enough that you adore me. You cheated because you were bored. How self-centered does that sound? Do you know? Infuriated, she shrugged, her composed expression unchanged. At least I'm being honest, even if it is selfish. Now be honest. The word tasted harsh on my tongue, and I spat it out. You believe this to be truthful? Her patience finally gave out. After months of deceiving me and moving behind my back, she asked, Eric, what do you want me to say? I apologize. All right, I apologize, but it makes no difference. No, I answered in a hushed voice. It transforms everything. We were silent as we stood there. For the first time, the weight of her thoughts and words hung between us like a gap that was impossible to cross. I was struck. This could not be fixed. I want you to go, I said at last, my voice steady and icy. Lauren's eyes grew a little wider. What? Did you hear me? Get out, I said. You're not staying here, so go stay with Bryce or whoever you want. For once, she looked at me with surprise, as though she hadn't thought I would really defend myself. She nodded after a while, her face hardening once more. All right, I'll pack my things, she said. I experienced a bizarre spectrum of feelings as she passed me, including anger, heartbreak, and a strange sense of relief. I had taken the first step towards taking back my life, but this was by no means over. That afternoon, Lauren departed. She tossed her overnight bag in her car's trunk, and I watched from the window. She moved quickly and purposefully. No hesitation or tears were shed. Farewell. No. Take a look at the home we constructed together. With a trail of dust and a silence that was more deafening than any quarrel we had ever had, she just drove away. I felt the emptiness right away. I was standing in the center of the living room, looking at the location of her favorite throw blanket. She had brought it along with a few other personal belongings, including the coffee mug with the chip, a picture frame, and a bottle of perfume. The lack of minor things shouted at me, but she never replaced them. Relief was what I wanted. I told her to go, after all, but I felt empty instead. The house felt too large that night. I pulled the batteries out of the kitchen clock because it was ticking too loudly. I tried watching TV, but it seemed like there was always some cocky pair holding hands or cracking a joke. I was even annoyed with the weather forecast. I ended up drinking a glass of whiskey while sitting in the dark, my mind racing. I was inundated with text messages when I got up the following morning. Jake came up with the first one. Have you heard anything, Jake? Then came one from my mother, who was totally unaware of the turmoil in my life. Don't forget dinner, Mom. Bring Lauren next Sunday. She promised to bring my favorite spinach dip. Neither of them received a response from me. I scrolled aimlessly instead, hoping to find something to divert my attention. I noticed her at that point. A photo had been uploaded to Instagram by Lauren. She was shown in what appeared to be an exclusive rooftop bar. She was holding a cocktail when she smiled. It said in the caption, "Sometimes the only way to discover your shining star is to venture into the unknown." I gazed at the display. Anger rapidly turned into disbelief. Less than 24 hours had passed since she had abandoned our marriage, and now she was rejoicing even more. "Bryce, you deserve it," Bryce had said. Lovely. I felt the nausea immediately. She wasn't simply letting go. She was showing it off in public. Insolently, I paced the room after tossing my phone onto the couch. My mind was racing. Was this what she had always intended to happen? To ruin my life and then show me her new one like some twisted lap of victory? Jake arrived unexpectedly during the middle of the afternoon. He allowed himself 2 beers. "I figured you might require these," he said. "Give me one. Regards," I mumbled as I fell into the couch. Using a keychain opener, he sat across from me and removed the cap on his drink. "What is the plan, then?" I gave him a look, perplexed. "Make a plan?" "Yes." Leaning forward, he spoke. "You won't just sit here and mope, will you?" I gave a shrug and took a large sip. "How else should I proceed?" Jake shook his head. Man, you can't let her win. While you're here crumbling, she's out there acting like this is some kind of empowering trip. I didn't answer. He wasn't incorrect, but it felt impossible to raise, much less resist the weight of it all. I mean it, Jake went on. You should start considering your options, like hiring a lawyer, going to treatment, or maybe just having a rebound affair. Something that will help you break out of your rut. The term attorney resonated. The legal aspect of things hadn't really crossed my mind yet. He was correct, but the property and the money seemed insignificant in comparison to the emotional devastation. Feelings were no longer the only factor in this. Perhaps I added, finally, but Jake rolled his eyes. Of course. She isn't already preparing her next move, are you? I was surprised by how strongly that concept struck me. Lauren was calculating. She had been all along. She would walk away, shattered, and I would be left to pick up the pieces if I didn't take quick action. I took out my laptop that evening and began researching custody arrangements, asset division, and divorce attorneys. The intricacy of it all was astounding, even though we were childless. I felt as though I was drowning in worst-case scenarios and legalese. At midnight, I received an email. Lauren sent it. Read about the house was the subject line. I opened it after hesitating. My gut was roiling. I understand that tensions are high at the moment, but we must discuss logistics, Eric. Tomorrow, I'll visit to retrieve the remaining items I own. Regarding the house, I believe it would be better if we sold it and divided the money. It's too much room for just the two of us, and we both deserve a new beginning. Tell me if you would like to deal with things via email, or if you would like to speak with me in person. Lauren's tone, which was so courteous and professional, made me tense. She seemed to be writing to a co-worker rather than the man she had just trampled on. I forcefully closed the laptop. I couldn't read it again. She would return tomorrow, and I would face another battle whether I was prepared or not. I woke up the following morning with the impression that I was getting ready for battle. Lauren was returning, and I wasn't going to let her take over this time. Despite the fact that she caught me off guard at the motel, this seemed like my home, or at least mine. Throughout the morning, I paced and practiced my words. Every possible scenario of the conversation, the cool-headed and collected one, the heated and combative one, the one in which I pleaded with her to change her mind, played out in my mind, but they all felt incorrect. In all honesty, I had no idea how I would respond until she was in front of me. Her automobile pulled into the driveway around lunchtime. She wore sunglasses and a sharp casual outfit consisting of jeans and a tailored blazer, as if she were going to a brunch, and I watched from the window of the living room. She knocked on the door, but I opened it before she could knock again, rather than gathering the shards of our existence together. "Hello." Neutral, almost detached, she said. I moved aside and gestured for her to come in. "Let's finish this up." Her perfume, which used to soothe me but now made my stomach turn, was still in the air as she passed me. Lauren wasted no time. She proceeded directly to the bedroom, where I had already packed the majority of her belongings into boxes. "I appreciate your packaging," she said. Polite, but lifeless was her tone. As though examining my work, she opened one of the boxes and started going through it. "You might have done this yourself." I watched her while leaning on the doorframe. She looked up. A tense smile curled her lips. "I had assumed you wouldn't want me to stay longer than absolutely necessary." "Take it you thought?" I said icily. She continued to move quickly and efficiently. "Look, Eric, this needs to be simple. I don't want it to be more difficult than necessary." Coming from the one who made this as difficult as possible, I murmured, crossing my arms, and her hands briefly froze. Then she turned to me with a sigh. "I am aware of your anger. Anger isn't even close to describing it." I raised my voice and cut in. "You spent months lying to me, Lauren. You're standing here acting like we're just splitting up after you cheated on me." Her face grew stern. "Eric, I will not stand here and argue with you. The done is the done. That's all." I questioned incredulously, without apologies or justification. She simply said, "What is done is done." She gave a shrug, her voice chilly. "I have previously described myself. I was unhappy until I met someone who gave me a sense of purpose again. I won't grovel, but I'm also not proud of how everything transpired." A mixture of sadness and rage tightened my chest, threatening to overtake me. You're not even concerned, are you? I spoke in a softer tone now. Not about what you did. Not about me. Lauren rolled her eyes. I'm not going to stay here and mope about your inability to move on, even if I do care. I glanced at her in disbelief at her boldness. Go on, I said again. You're telling me to go on after tearing my life apart? Continue. She picked up another box and made her way to the entrance. Eric, I'm not doing this. I didn't come to revisit the past. I came here to reclaim my belongings. I blocked the door by moving into her path. Ian suarat firmly. We are discussing this. It's not your turn to leave. For the first time, I noticed a break in her composed exterior as her eyes flared with annoyance. Eric, what do you want me to say? She snapped. I apologize. All right, I apologize. I regret not leaving sooner. I apologize. I apologize if staying in a failing marriage makes me the antagonist in your tale, but I'm done acting like this can be resolved. I was taken aback by what she said, but I wasn't going to back down. You believe that you were the victim. I fired back. You believe I'm the villain because I gave you all I had, trusted you, and loved you. Lauren took a while to reply. Rather, she inhaled deeply, her hands clenched around the package in her grasp. Eric, this isn't about identifying the villain. Moving forward is the key, and that's what I'm attempting to accomplish. I moved aside to give her space. Proceed, I said bitterly. Run to Bryce, make a new beginning, but don't return here if it fails. In the doorway, she paused. For a second, I thought I saw something spark in her eyes as she turned to face me one last time. Perhaps it was hesitation or regret, but it vanished as fast as it appeared. Eric, goodbye. She spoke quietly before disappearing. I waited in the empty doorway as her car vanished down the street, the burden of her absence hanging over me like a thick shroud. Even though I believed that the life we had created together was coming to an end, a new thought started to enter my mind as I locked the door behind me. Perhaps her departure wasn't the end. It might have been the start of something better. The silence in the house felt alive the first night after Lauren's permanent departure. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floors, the distance, and the sound of a passing car all appeared sharper and louder. The room seemed empty, as if its warmth and intent had been sapped. Staring at my laptop, I sat at the dining table. I gazed back at her email regarding the sale of the house. Her well-considered comments had too much space for just the two of us, as indicated by the blinking cursor at the conclusion. I didn't respond. It was impossible for me to interact with her on her terms. Not quite yet. Rather, I opened a new tab and searched for the best divorce attorneys in my area. All of the names in the search results that flooded the screen promised efficiency and experience, but none of them seemed genuine to me. It was more than simply paperwork. It was tearing apart a life. Until my phone buzzed on the table, I scrolled mindlessly. Jake had left a message. You're hanging around, Jake. Want to grab a beverage? I considered ignoring it. It was difficult to think about being social, but it was better than staying here in this empty house and losing myself in my thoughts. I picked up my keys and responded to the text, arrived by 15. I met Jake at a little pub on the outskirts of town. It was one of those establishments that made an excessive effort to appear rustic, complete with expensive craft beer and faux wooden beams. But it was just what I needed tonight, a spot to sit, drink, and avoid overthinking. I slid into the booth opposite Jake, who said, "Man, you look rough." "Regards," I replied, signaling the waitress for a drink in a whisper. Jake lifted his glass, waiting for me to join him. He smiled wryly as he remarked, "To new beginnings." I clinked my beer half-heartedly against his. Despite my sneer, I took a long drink. It seems more like a conclusion. Good endings are possible. Jake leaned back in his chair and spoke. Before you can rebuild, sometimes you have to burn everything down. I gave an eye roll. You have the voice of an inspirational poster. Jake smiled. Hey, someone needs to stop you from going into a downward spiral. For a while, we sat in silence, the bar's soft hum filling the void. Jake then leaned forward, his face growing grave. What is the plan, then? Attorney. With my eyes fixed on my drink, I added, work out the house, the finances, everything. I simply don't know where to begin. Jake sternly stated, "First, keep in mind that this isn't your fault." I was taken aback by the strength of his voice when I looked up at him. "Eric, you didn't do this," he went on. "She did. It's terrible that she made the decision she did, but you have the power to determine what happens next." I wasn't prepared for how hard his remarks struck. I had felt that I was the victim of Lauren's choices, deceptions, treachery, and departure for a very long time. However, Jake might have been correct. Perhaps it was time for me to assume command. The place felt less oppressive when I arrived home that evening. There was a glimmer of something else, a tiny spark of hope, or perhaps simply determination. But it was still hollow and full of echoes of what had been. I opened my laptop, took a seat at the dining table, and started writing my response to Lauren's email. "We'll utilize the lawyers to sell the house if you want to, Lauren. I'm done acting like we can work things out peacefully. Eric, you made your decision, and I'm making mine." Though short, it was sufficient. With a weird sensation of relief, I pressed send and shut down the laptop. The days that followed were filled with meetings with solicitors, paperwork, and the gradual reconstruction of my existence. I resolved to resume going to the gym after discovering an old membership card hidden in a drawer, if only to release the pent-up restlessness since Lauren's departure. Then one night a parcel showed up at my door. It had no return address and was small, wrapped in simple brown paper. Wondering, I opened it. Inside was a framed picture. Tucked underneath was a photo of Lauren and me from years ago, when we were still happy and I believed we were unbreakable. With the picture was a handwritten note. "I apologize, Elle, for what it's worth." For a long time, I gazed at the note, emotions seething inside me. Anger, despair, and even a glimmer of closure. She apologized, but not enough to stay or defend our possessions. Feeling like I was finally starting to leave her behind, I put the picture face down on the table and turned to leave it there. After Lauren left, there was a slight change in life, although it didn't happen right away. The days seemed more like shards of normalcy than a cloud, returning slowly. I followed my schedule, occupying the quiet with work, going to the gym, and occasionally having a beer with Jake. I was learning to live with the house, but it was still too enormous and too full of memories. I was in the middle of going through some old boxes in the attic a week after she left. My phone buzzed, and a strange number appeared on the screen. I would normally ignore it, but I felt compelled to pick it up. "Hi there," I replied, while cleaning my hands of dust. The voice on the other end, Eric, sounded tentative but recognizable. It took me a moment to place it. "Stephanie?" "Yes, it's Eric here. What is going on?" After a pause, she let out a sigh. "You must know something, but I wasn't sure if I should give you a call." My stomach grew constricted. "What is it?" "It has to do with Bryce," she said. Her tone was serious. I braced myself by sitting on an old trunk. "Proceed." "Look, Bryce has a past, but I didn't want to become involved," she started, explaining that he has a pattern and has dated many married women. After promising them the world and sweeping them off their feet, he moves on to the next one. I clench my jaw. "You're implying that Lauren is merely another accomplishment for him?" Stephanie paused. "I'm trying to tell you to be ready. He's not the kind to stay, and she might return to you after he's finished." I felt rage, disbelief, and a strange, bitter vindication as a result of the idea. "You're telling me this, but why?" "Since I've witnessed this occur previously," she explained. "He left my friend absolutely unprepared, sad, and embarrassed. I simply didn't want you to be taken by surprise." With the weight of her words weighing on me, I slowly let out the phrase, "If things fall apart, thank you for informing me." "You're welcome," she said softly. "In any case, you seem like a decent guy, Eric. This is not fair to you." I sat there looking at the attic ceiling's sloping beams for a while after we hung up. Lauren had fallen for Bryce's charm, which was little more than a weapon, but the part that hurt the most was the thought that she might turn back. What would I do if she realized what she had lost? That was the question that plagued me. The answer knocked on my door 2 days later. I heard the hesitant, quiet knock just before midnight. I had a book in my lap and was half asleep on the couch. She was there when I opened the door, startled by the sound. Lauren stood on the doorstep with swollen, red eyes and smudged makeup. She didn't resemble the polished, self-assured woman who had left my life. She appeared to be broken. "Eric," she said. Her voice wavered. "Lauren, what do you want?" I asked in a chilly tone. "I was wrong," she muttered. Like a challenge, the words lingered in the air. I leaned against the doorframe with my arms crossed. "An error. That's what you call it," I said. Her eyes filled with tears, but I remained motionless. "I was foolish," she said, her voice breaking. "I believed that Bryce was unique, but I was mistaken. Eric, he told me a lie. The entire time he was seeing someone else. I had no idea." I gazed at her, my feelings a complex mixture of rage, sympathy, and a perilous near satisfaction. "You understand how it feels now," I said silently. One tear trickled down Lauren's cheek as she winced. "I really don't know where else to go. Eric, please. There are many places for you to visit," I said, stepping back, "but that's not one of them." She flinched. "Please, Eric." "Lauren, no." I firmly interrupted her. "Your decisions were your own. You wish to return after leaving through that door because Bryce's relationship didn't work out? This isn't how it operates." For a moment, she covered her face with her hands while sobbing. I was on the verge of feeling terrible for her until I remembered the hotel, the texts, and the way she had looked at me as if I were the issue. The sympathy disappeared. "I wish you luck in resolving this," I remarked, returning inside. "But you're not figuring them out here." I locked the door after shutting it. Her hushed sobs were diminishing. I experienced an odd sensation of calm as I left her for the first time in weeks. I didn't get much sleep that night since, for the first time, I was finally in charge of my life and my home. My head was aflutter with feelings following Lauren's visit. It had been weeks since I had felt that strongly. There was an overpowering sensation of relief combined with the fury, still burning beneath the surface. For once, I had made the decision to confront her. For the first time in a long time, I felt as though the burden on my chest had decreased as the morning arrived clear and bright. After making coffee, I sat by the window and watched the neighborhood gradually come into life. I still thought about Lauren's visit, but it felt like a turning point rather than a setback. Later that day, my lawyer Melissa called me. "The initial draft of the property split agreement is in our possession. The terms of the house sale are quite normal," she continued. "But before we move further, I wanted to make sure you were still sure you wanted to sell." I stopped and looked at the surrounding walls. This mansion had served as a prison and a haven. It was full of memories, both painful and lovely. All of that would have to go if I sold it, but perhaps that was just what I needed. "Yes," I said, "let's sell at last." "Well done. This will help things move faster," Melissa said. After the call, I went around the house one more time, room by room, taking in the living room where we'd spent many hours watching awful television and the kitchen where Lauren used to hum while brewing coffee. Even the bedroom, where the quiet was more oppressive than before. It was more than a house. It was time for me to close that chapter of my life. Jake arrived that night with a six-pack and takeaway. He did it to make sure I didn't spend too much time alone, and it had become our new habit. As he sat down on the couch, I remarked, "Big news." "Oh," Jake answered, opening a beer. "Put it on me." "The house is for sale," I said, sounding so composed that I surprised myself. Jake's eyebrows went up. "That's enormous, damn it. Are you certain about this?" "Yes," I nodded. "The time has come. This location, it's excessive. I require a new beginning." Jake gave a nod in a positive way. "Well done, dude. So, where will you go?" "I'm not sure yet. Somewhere smaller," I confessed. "It's exclusively mine." The remainder of the evening was devoted to discussing potential outcomes. For the first time, apartments downtown, perhaps a little home on the outskirts, seemed less intimidating. Lauren sent me another message 2 days later. It was an email this time. "Even though things didn't work out the way I had hoped, I want to thank you for listening to me the other night, Eric. After much reflection, I've come to the conclusion that I took you for granted. I will always regret what I did to you because you didn't deserve it. I hope we can find some sort of peace one day, even though I know I can't repair the harm." I read the email again, trying to take in what Lauren had to say. A part of me wanted to remove it right away in order to permanently cut off contact with her. However, there was another aspect of me that continued to remember the positive times. It was an odd feeling of closure. Perhaps it was sufficient that she had shown regret, even if it was too late to make a difference. I didn't respond. Rather, I closed my laptop and marked the email as read. The ensuing weeks were filled with preparation and paperwork. I began looking at apartments, and Melissa assisted in closing the house sale. At first, it felt overpowering, but I felt a bit lighter with each step. One day, while organizing some old boxes, I came across a photo album Lauren and I had created during our first year of marriage. It was full of pictures from our honeymoon, birthdays, and carefree Sundays spent lounging on the couch. I turned the pages and allowed the memories to envelop me. Naturally, there was sadness, but there was also an odd feeling of thankfulness. Even if those moments didn't last, they had been genuine. After I was done, I put the album in a donation box and closed it. I didn't need to carry it about any longer. I stood in the empty living room on the day the house sold, taking one last look around. Seeing it devoid of all the furnishings, decor, and other items that had made it ours was weird, yet it was no longer ours. It was merely a house. I put the keys in the envelope for the new owners, shut the door, and turned to leave. I felt free for the first time in months. I was beginning to adjust to my new life 2 weeks after Lauren's late-night visit. With Melissa taking care of the legal aspects, there was a sense of relief after the decision to sell the house was made. I concentrated on the future, finding a new location and a new beginning. I had been looking at flat postings, picturing myself in a more compact, uncomplicated flat with no ghosts hiding in the corners. However, my phone rang on the table as I combed through the din of real estate emails. I didn't recognize the number, but I felt compelled to respond. "Hi there, Eric." The sound of her words made my chest constrict. Since that night at my door, Lauren had not phoned. "What are you looking for?" I inquired, my tone sturdy but sharp. I could hear her breathing on the other end as she paused. "I know you owe me nothing," she finally said. "I just wanted to speak once, please, without the attorneys and without rage." I reclined in my chair and gazed up at the ceiling. My gut prompted me to end the call. Despite my better judgment, I remained on the line, even though she didn't merit my time or effort. "Why? Right now?" I asked, sounding colder than I meant to. "I'm not sure," she acknowledged. "I suppose I'm merely attempting to comprehend how we arrived at this point." I laughed resentfully. "I take it you're kidding? How we got here is a mystery to you." "I erred," she said quickly, sounding defensive. "I'm aware of it, but I wasn't alone, Eric." Her remarks infuriated me. "You're going to attempt to blame me now, I see." I lost my temper. "It was you who was moving stealthily. It was you who ripped us apart. Don't sit here and pretend that I was involved in this." "It's not your fault," she said softly. "Simply put, I don't believe it was ever as flawless as we believed." I got up and started to pace the room. "What the heck? That makes everything acceptable. You chose to cheat because you were bored. You simply rushed to the first guy who gave you attention rather than attempting to correct the situation or speak with me." Lauren took a while to reply. Her voice was shaking when she finally said something. "Eric, it wasn't like that. Yes, I couldn't find my way." And Bryce gave me a sense of importance once more. "It wasn't about you, even though I realized that sounds self-centered. It has to do with me." Her remarks struck like a kick to the belly. To put her justifications in her face, I wanted to yell. Instead, I took a seat and let out a long, deep breath. "You had the option to inform me," I said silently. "Anything could have been stated by you, rather than shocking me in this way. I was terrified of what you may think." She spoke in a voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. "I was scared of hurting you, but I ended up hurting you even more. I am aware of that." The rage briefly subsided and was replaced by an unidentified substance. Was it closure, sympathy? I had no idea. "How come you're actually referring to me now, Lauren?" I asked in a forceful but composed voice. "I need you to know that I did love you." She hesitated, fumbling for the right words. "And I still care for you," she said finally, "even if I no longer have the authority to say that." I let her words sink in by closing my eyes. They were hollow today, yet once I would have done anything to hear them. Too little, too late. "Lauren," my voice was steady as I spoke. "Thank you for saying that, but it makes no difference. The done is done. We're done." She didn't dispute. She didn't cry. She simply exhaled a trembling breath. "I know," she said. "Eric, I apologize. For everything." Nothing else could be said. For the first time, I put my phone down on the table and ended the call. I thought I could finally put Lauren behind me. With finality, not with resentment. Although she was a part of my story, it was no longer my story. I opened my laptop and resumed my flat hunt as the evening became closer. A place where I could start afresh, somewhere new and different. A month later, I was standing in my new apartment's entryway with a box that had Jake's messy handwriting on it that read kitchen stuff. It was a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city center, but it was mine. Jake placed a second box. I looked around and nodded gratefully at the space near the couch. It wasn't too awful. A bit of a bachelor feel, he added, but you'll manage. I grinned. Isn't that the point? I asked as Jake opened a bottle of beer he had brought as a housewarming present. This is it then? Clean slate, new beginning, etc. He said that kind of thing. I sat down next to the coffee table on the floor. It felt appropriate, even if the flat was still largely vacant. It was free of the burden of what might have been and recollections of Lauren. I had to discover who I was on this blank canvas. Let's move forward from the past now, Jake said, lifting his beer behind him. Without turning around, I clinked my bottle against his. After Jake left that evening, I quietly unpacked. Through the windows, the sounds of the city could be heard. Automobiles honking, people conversing, and the distant buzz of music. I found it soothing, even though it was different from the peaceful suburban life I had left behind. I opened a picture frame and gazed at it for a while. It was taken on my wedding day, with Lauren and me grinning at the camera while surrounded by loved ones. I briefly considered discarding it, but ultimately, I removed the picture from the frame and put it at the back of a drawer. Erasing the past was not the goal. Making space for the future was. I started to piece my life back together over the course of the following several weeks. I began going to the gym more frequently because it felt good, not merely as a diversion. I reconnected with old pals with whom I had lost contact, unexpectedly meeting over coffee or cocktails. Work became more of a focus and less of a chore. I poured myself into it for the first time in years because I wanted to succeed, not because I had to get away. Both I and my coworkers noticed the change. Once, I ran into a woman who had dropped her notepad as I was hurrying past her at a neighborhood cafe where I was getting coffee. I apologized for that, I said, stooping to pick it up. "Don't worry," she replied with a warm smile. She was working on what appeared to be graphic design while seated at a corner table. Her name was Claire. We spoke for a few minutes after I apologized once more. There was something invigorating about her. No games, no pretense, just a casual discussion. Before I left, she smiled playfully and gave me her business card. "I'll cover the next coffee," she said. I didn't call her right away. The encounter stuck with me, even though I wasn't prepared for anything significant and wasn't sure if I ever would be. It was a reminder that life moves on, and there are still worthwhile individuals to meet and get to know. My thoughts of Lauren dwindled as the weeks stretched into months. Although the scars were still there, they no longer defined who I was when her chapter in my life ended. Although I wasn't fully recovered, I was getting better. Although I wasn't fixed, I was strengthening myself. And for the first time in a long time, I was anticipating what was going to happen next.